Now that Paul Heyman has finally teamed up with Roman Reigns and the big dog is a bad guy, everybody is talking and everybody is excited because, of course, we've been asking for this since 1322 when we were hanging around as old dudes going, I want Roman Reigns to be an asshole. Well, now he is. But the real interesting part of everything I just said is that yes, he has teamed with the former head of ECW, and now when you do go through the years, you can find all these wrestlers that sometimes have embettered their careers thanks to Mr. Heyman, and others where it didn't work at all. So I was like, look, we're here on What Culture Wrestling. My name is Simon Miller. Why don't we rank every single one? Sit yourself down. That's what we're gonna do. Number 27, Curtis Axel. Now, I always thought that Curtis Axel never got his due in WWE, even though we did have moments like this where we teamed him up with Paul Heyman. But the problem was, at this period, during this era, Paul Heyman had also been with Brock Lesnar, and Paul Heyman had also been with CM Punk. So unless we were gonna treat Curtis in the same way, it was never gonna work. And this lasted around about 3 seconds. It lasted around 3 seconds. It didn't help Curtis Axel at all. He did nothing. And within a month, it was pretty much dead, and then Heyman vanished for a while. Number 26, Team Lesnar. You probably don't remember Team Lesnar, and I don't blame you because it happened 17 years ago in 2003. You likely don't remember what you had for breakfast yesterday, so how the hell are you gonna remember anything from back then? But yeah, given that Paul Heyman had Brock Lesnar and Big Show in his pocket already, and the fact the Survivor Series pay-per-view was coming up, he must have thought to himself, well, if I can get 3 more guys and create a group, who knows what kind of mayhem I can unleash. The 3 names he found was A-Train Matt Morgan and my other dad, Nathan Jones, and because Heyman was the SmackDown general manager at the time, this was quite a cool idea. We're like, oh man, what are they going to be able to do? Unfortunately, they got to the event and then they just lost before they went their separate ways, but it was actually, for a little while, okay. Number 25, Cesaro. It has long been said that rather than put Paul Heyman with Cesaro to try and lift up Cesaro, Paul Heyman got put with Cesaro to try and lower Paul Heyman's status in the company. If that is true, I'm just gonna hold my head and shout out, what the hell are you doing? The Swiss Superman is so capable of being more than you think he is. The major issue with this one though is that it was just so underthought. Like, here I stand in 2020 and I still don't really know what their relationship was, and it did leave Cesaro in a worse position because he kind of had a good guy babyface momentum thing going on, and when they finally split these two up, it was just poof and he wasn't doing anything. I don't like saying this kind of stuff, but what a wasted opportunity. Number 24, the Dark Patriot. The Dark Patriot was actually the wrestler known as Doug Gilbert, and that name may ping something in your brain because, of course, he was the brother of Eddie Gilbert, who, if we're being honest, went up to a little bit more success than his bro did. However, when they were in ECW, they were managed by Paul E. Dangerously, who led them to the ECW Tag Team titles, and therefore, he's got to be considered a Paul Heyman guy. I mean, they didn't really do that much together, but if we're going to go through every single one, you have to throw this one out there. And now I know you're Googling Dark Patriot, and you're about to learn something new about professional wrestling. You're welcome. Number 23, the Samoan SWAT team. Long before Sabu and Fatu were the head shrinkers, they were in WCW known as the Samoan SWAT team, and yes, they were managed by Paul Heyman, who had said goodbye to the Midnight Express, his original charges, and welcomed these guys on board instead. And you know he must have enjoyed this because when Samoa Joe and Brock Lesnar were feuding a few years back, Paul even brought it up. And once again, it's just one of those teams, if you remember, it puts a smile on your face, and if you don't have to worry about it because they didn't do anything of note. But in terms of what their careers would go on to do, it all started here, and that's historic. Number 22, Hardcore Holly. Another one that likely doesn't pop into your head because who the hell remembers Hardcore Holly in WWECW in 2006? But yes, he was chosen as Paul Heyman's hired heel to run through the promotion and just create a lot of mayhem. And you already know that this didn't work because nothing in WWE's reimagining of ECW did work, and just don't even go and watch it. Be pleased that you now know, but then just try and forget about it as soon as you can. Number 21, Heidenreich. The reason Paul Heyman got put with Heidenreich is because WWE wanted to do a big match between The Undertaker and this man. And I tell you what, they got this close. There was something kind of interesting about him, but he was also really bizarre, and there was kind of a disconnect between he and the audience. It all came to a head in 2005 when the powers that be decided, oh no, we've made a mistake here. Heidenreich doesn't know what he's doing, and it was also the last on-screen role that Paul Heyman had before in 2006 he took charge of WWECW. And as we've already talked about, that sucked. Number 20, Jimmy Snooker. This one's absolutely amazing because it was ECW before it came Extreme and was simply known as Eastern Championship Wrestling. And Paulie Dangerously Heyman was there, basically doing the exact same thing he had been doing in WCW. And because of that, they were trying to get as many notable names as possible. One of them was Jimmy Snooker. Because they wanted to make the Superfly a bad guy, they did indeed put him with Heyman, but this actually worked quite well because they were presenting a familiar character, but in a new way, and audiences kind of latched onto it. Fair play. Number 19, Ryback. When WWE wanted to continue on the madness between Paul Heyman and CM Punk after they had broken up, they went and found Ryback and put him with Paul Heyman instead. Now, this wasn't a total waste of time and it wasn't totally terrible, but did it help Ryback? No. Did it help Paul Heyman? No. Did it really go anywhere? No. Should we have not have done it? Yes. Fair play to both guys because they did throw themselves into their roles and they desperately tried to make it work, but I just don't think it did. This is kind of the same as Curtis Axel. You wanted it to be good, but it just never arrived. Number 18, the Dudley Boyz. This made all the sense in the world given their history and their ties to Extreme Championship Wrestling, but WWE just left it too late to pull the trigger, and by the time we were doing this in 2004, it was just too little, too late. Bubba Ray and Devon had lost some of their momentum and Heyman had just been fired as the SmackDown general manager, and as you probably remember, it all led to a massive feud with The Undertaker and the main event at the Great American Bash when the dead man killed Paul Bearer for no reason. And I'm not a joke, that's what happened. And as soon as I do bring that up, you'd rather have a conversation about that, which sums up the relationship between the Dudley Boyz and Paul Heyman. No. Number 17, Mean Mark Callis. And talking of The Undertaker, when he first arrived in the business as Mean Mark Callis, everybody saw him as a big guy that wasn't able to talk, so they needed to find him a mouthpiece. And can you believe who they got? That's right, it was Paul Heyman. They only worked together for a short stint because Mark Callaway got a call from one Vincent Kennedy McMahon who said, hey, would you like to be The Undertaker? And he made the kind of daring decision at the time to do that, and it would change his life forever. But it still counts. Number 16, Roman Reigns. Now, I had no idea where to put Roman Reigns in this list because as of me talking, they've only been together 2 weeks, and while I absolutely love it and I'm excited, it could all be dead in like a month. It's WWE in 2020, you just never know. So I thought we'll just stick the big dog in the middle and that would work all round. But yeah, once again, I am very, very excited about this. I think if we do treat it right, it will be absolutely tremendous. And just having Roman Reigns as a heel, well, it's like having a nice bath on a Sunday evening. It just feels right. I want Reigns and Heyman to be flipping excellent. Number 15, Arn Anderson. Given that Double A had already established himself as a group guy for like a decade in the Four Horsemen, it made all the sense in the world that Paulie Dangerously would go, hey, Arn, do you want to be in my Dangerous Alliance? And he was like, well, yeah, I don't have any mates anymore. I'm going to do it. Obviously, Anderson didn't need anybody to talk for him because he could do that by himself. But when he was in the match and to establish him as being a heel, it certainly helped when he would cheat from the outside or, as he would put it, offer assistance. So it was just like a legendary name to put in a stable that had a lot of legendary names. Number 14, Bobby Eaton. See what I just say about legendary names? Because Bobby Eaton was also in the Dangerous Alliance and Paul Heyman knew him very well when he was having a program with Jim Cornette and their versions of the Midnight Express both clashed years before this happened. It worked perfectly too because Eaton always had this like kind of low threat aura about him, so you were watching him the whole time thinking, oh my gosh, when is he gonna burst? Number 13, 911. One of Paul Heyman's biggest catchphrases has always been enhance the strengths and hide the weaknesses. And my word did he do that with the big man known as 911 in ECW. I mean, he was only ever rolled out to destroy some kind of loser, but the hardcore audience was desperate for it. So you never actually picked up on how limited he was in the ring because Heyman just thought it out so well. And just associating himself with 911 gave him all the fuel that was needed for the fire. This honestly was taking limitations and doubling them at their best. Number 12, Larry Zabisco. And we're back to the Dangerous Alliance because the living legend, Larry Zabisco, was also in there. I will set you this task. You go out and you find another group that had this kind of talent flowing through it. As Zabisco's career was winding down in 1992, he kind of took on the Ric Flair and Evolution type role, but he did it so well, and he would often team with somebody known as Steve Austin. If you don't want to see that, you're crazy. Number 11, the Midnight Express. We've already hinted at this one a few times, but back in 1988 in Jim Crockett Promotions, the old Midnight Express came into the promotion to feud with the new Midnight Express, and they needed somebody to lead them in there, and they chose Paul Heyman. And these guys were such assholes that it actually babyfaced the other version of the Midnight Express that consisted of Jim Cornette, Stan Lane, and Bobby Eaton. And just think of some of the names that have come out of my mouth. On the microphones, on one hand, you had Paul Heyman, on the other, you had Jim Cornette. It was like chalk and cheese, but it was also delicious. It didn't last long because Condrey left the promotion soon afterwards, but even if you can just get into this for the teeniest bit, it is old school wrestling perfection. Number 10, Team Angle. There was a lot of bollocks in 2002, if I dare say that word, as everybody was trying to get the World Championship off Brock Lesnar onto the Big Show and finally around Kurt Angle's waist. However, the end result of this was Team Angle, led by Paul Heyman, and it rocked. Of course, the Olympic gold medalist at that time didn't need any help, but I tell you who did. His brand new best friends, Charlie Haas and Shelton Benjamin, and they just felt more significant simply because they were hanging around with Kurt Angle and because they were hanging around with Paul Heyman. It's just the simple things make so much sense. Why aren't we doing stuff like this now? Number 9, Austin Idol and Tommy Rich. Managing these blonde bastards in Memphis as they had an incredibly heated program with Jerry Lawler, Paul Heyman's run with Austin Idol and Tommy Rich culminated in this crazy cage match in 1987. Put it on the network and watch it. If it's on there, I think it is. Idol and Lawler had a hair versus hair match surrounded by the steel so that nobody could interfere, but Paul, being the smart thinking manager he was, put Rich underneath the ring, who popped up and interfered as soon as he needed to. The trio then absolutely battered Lawler in his hometown as the crowd could not believe what they were seeing, but it didn't end well for Paul Heyman, because he then had to have a scaffold match against the King and Bill Dundee. And if you thought this first ass whooping was bad, it was not as bad as this one. Number 8, Steve Austin. Long before we knew about Stone Cold, and even long before we saw Austin in ECW, Paul Heyman and Stunning Steve started their relationship in WCW in, of course, the Dangerous Alliance. Heyman has said from this point on that he knew that Steve Austin was going to go right to the top, and boy howdy was he right. Hence why in between his stints in WCW and WWF, he said, please come into Extreme Championship Wrestling. You don't even have to wrestle. I know you're hurt. I just want to cut some promos with you. And that's all he did. They had another little get-together in 2001 when, of course, the Rattlesnake was head of the Alliance. But ever since then, I think they're just friends. I mean, he's been on Stone Cold's podcast a lot. It has to stand to reason. Number 7, Taz. There is no two ways about it. Whether you're talking about ECW on-screen or ECW off-screen, Paul Heyman believed in Taz so much he turned him into the biggest star in the whole stupid promotion. He came across as hard as nails from day one, and when he turned his back on Paul Heyman in 1995 and went heel, fans couldn't believe this, and they almost cried, which they didn't because they're an ECW crowd and they didn't do that at all. But honestly, this is one of the best things that ECW ever did, and it's all because Taz and Paul Heyman were joined like this. Number 6, Rick Rude. When Rick Rude surprisingly jumped from the WWF to WCW in 1990, it seemed like he'd made a fantastic choice, because he kind of went from upper mid-card to main eventers, and yes, he was put with Paul Heyman. He was also able to secure the United States Championship as he joined the Dangerous Alliance, and Rick Rude just had it all. That's all I'm going to say. He passed away way too soon, and even in the World Wrestling Federation, he should have been a bigger champion. Remember, he used to thrust everything, and the women would love it, but the men would boo? So damn ravishing. Number 5, Eddie Gilbert. Having worked with Paul Heyman already in the 80s, the two came back together in ECW and together came up with a concept that really would change the fate of professional wrestling. Paulie Dangerous and Gilbert joined together in the Hot Stuff International group, and their whole point to all of this is that if they started to increase the violence and the carnage, fans may get really into it and they could create a niche for themselves. Boy howdy were they right. The worst part is that Gilbert passed away in 1995, so he never got to see the fruits of his labor, but never forget, he was a part of this revolution. Number 4, Sabu. Sabu was every part of the suicidal, homicidal, genocidal maniac that ECW made him out to be, but when you saw 911, who was massive, and Paul Heyman having to hold him back before matches, you actually said to yourself, does this guy know wrestling is fake? Because it certainly didn't look like it. Coming across like an absolute crazy person, even today some of the antics that Sabu did will absolutely blow your mind, and having Paul Heyman being his mouthpiece and just bigging him up all the time actually filled you with fear. So he was the perfect presence to ensure that this whole narrative and story was expertly told, and once again, he hid all of Sabu's weaknesses. like going nuts. Number 3, The Big Show. Paul Heyman clearly loved The Big Show in real life because he went out of his way to bill him and present him as the giant we all hoped he would be. Don't forget he won the championship from Brock Lesnar, and why do you think that happened? Paul Heyman. Stints together in 2002, 2003 and 2006 always worked as well because the real life Paul White just came across like a more threatening and aggressive character. Show was also one of the only decent things in the WWE CW revival. Apart from that one dude that came out called the Nacho Man and did Macho Man impressions, that was quite funny. But honestly, I would say, I'd have to go and watch it, that any time Big Show was on top, it was all because of Mr. Heyman. Number 2, CM Punk. The fact that Paul Heyman was trying to push CM Punk when he was just in the developmental territory known as OVW within WWE shouldn't surprise you at all, because as soon as they came together on screen, well, it was just magic, wasn't it? Who doesn't miss Paul Heyman and CM Punk? You bet your ass I do. They were together when Punk went on that crazy world championship run, and when Paul turned his back on him, it hit you right in the stomach, it hit you right on the feels, because you could totally believe they were best friends. They also both cut great promos. Sometimes Heyman was doing it, other times it was all down to CM. This is one of my favorite relationships ever. You could probably argue that if CM Punk ever did come back to WWE, you could do it again, because let's face it, it also happened with he who is number 1. And in at number 1, Brock Lesnar. Because let's face it, when Paul Heyman decided to become the agent for Brock Lesnar in 2002 when he first burst on the scene, it is one of the best coming togethers ever. A real life friendship grew between the two to the point that when he came back in 2012, after a few weeks, he was backstage talking about Brock going, somebody has to get Paul Heyman in here. We don't work without each other. And then he did come back, and you know what happened then. Remember Paul Heyman's face when Brock Lesnar beat The Undertaker at WrestleMania 30? These two are like peas in a pod. They have to be together. I mean, you could even argue ever since then, they have been World Wrestling Entertainment's most vital attraction. I know people like to rag on Brock Lesnar, but he is a star. He does bring the people in, and it works so well. I know I've said it once, I'll say it twice. It's like it was meant to be, and I still can't believe it. Hence why they're at number 1, and you damn right I like Brock Lesnar. I mean, you gonna say anything else to his face? No, he'd kill you. Now, of course, you want to rearrange some of those, but that's what you're going to do in the comments. Get mad and let me know. Like the video, share the video, subscribe to What Culture Wrestling. Head over to whatculture.com where you can read articles like this and just have a good old time. Follow What Culture on Twitter, What Culture WWE, and watch more videos here on What Culture Wrestling. My name is Simon from What Culture. Thank you very much for joining me. I'll see you soon.